and welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, April 6th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul Demain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com, and here are the latest stories from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. 5 people, including a baby, were injured in an explosion early April 4th at a house on Fort Yates on the Standing Rock Reservation that straddles North and South Dakota's border. Preliminary investigations pointed to a propane gas explosion. Sioux County Sheriff Frank Landius said officials with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the State Fire Marshal's Office will be determining the official cause, he said. Frontline reveals a little-known chapter of the Catholic Church sex abuse story, decades of abuse of Native Americans by priests and other church workers in Alaska. In The Silence, the second of 2 magazine segments airing on Tuesday, April 19th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on PBS, Frontline producer Tom Curran and reporter Mark Trahan examine the legacy of abuse by a number of men who worked for the Catholic Church among Alaska's far west coast in the late 1960s and early 1970s. They would leave behind a trail of hundreds of claims of abuse, making this one of the hardest hit regions in the country. As part of the recent church settlement with the victims, the Bishop of Fairbanks, Donald Cutler, was asked to do something that no other bishop in the country had done: return to all of the villages where the abuses occurred and apologize to the victims in person. In December 2010, Frontline gained unique access to Bishop Kettler's visit to the village of St. Michael, frequently referred to as Ground Zero for the abuse, where the bishop would come face to face with the reality of the abuse that the church had refused to acknowledge for many years. The Silence is a Lower 48 Films production of WGBH and Frontline and the Native American Public Telecommunications and of Native American Public Telecommunications. Alaska Natives have established a solid foundation in the state's tourism industry, captivating visitors with the dance and songs, their art and history as varied as the tribes themselves. Much of the cultural boom is found at cruise ship ports, Alaska's largest cities, and points along the state's minimum road system. But travel experts say independent travelers are increasingly venturing to isolated villages to experience life with descendants of the continent's first inhabitants on their ancient grounds. Camille Ferguson with the Sitka Tribe of Alaska says perpetuating a tribal culture is one way of keeping it alive. The tribe is one of the organizers of a 3-day cultural tourism conference taking place next week in the southeast Alaska town of Sitka, which has a large Tlingit or Tlingit population. Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack announced today that tribal nutrition education projects in Wisconsin have been selected to receive grants this year through USDA's food distribution program on Indian reservations. The grants will help develop creative, self-initiated projects designed to enhance the nutritional knowledge and to foster positive lifestyle changes of participants in low-income households living on Indian reservations. The projects selected were the Red Cliff Band of Chippewa Indians Food Distribution Program for the Midwest Nutrition Advisory Committee of $115,000 and the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin with $39,000, in which they will offer cooking and canning classes, including assisting up to 30 families to develop home vegetable gardens this summer. Oklahoma basketball coaches need to get their nominees in for the 16th annual Oklahoma Indian All-State Championship Games. You can get the nomination papers by calling 918-642-3162, and they are due by April 30th. And Ernie Stevens Jr. of Oneida, Wisconsin, has been returned to the chairmanship of the National Indian Gaming Association in elections held at their annual conference in Arizona on April 5th, 121-14 for Ivan Mikkel. And in Wisconsin, in one of the tightest races in years with the largest turnout of voters ever for a Supreme Court race, incumbent Supreme Court Justice David Prosser was turned out by a 204 official votes for Joanne Kloppenberg out of over 1.5 million votes cast, a margin well under the number of American Indian voters that turned out in Wisconsin to support her, including a 100-vote margin on the Menominee Indian Reservation. Prosser had said earlier this year that he was very compatible with the new Republican legislature and popular Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Even an endorsement 3 days ago by Tea Party activists Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann couldn't save the incumbent, only one of 5 in Wisconsin's history to ever been turned out of their incumbency. And today we go to correspondent Mark Trihant, who is watching Washington, D.C., and the imminent shutdown of the United States government, where the Tea Party is not only holding the nation hostage, but its own Republican Party. And Mark's going to tell us a little bit about how that's going to affect Indian country. Mark Trihant, we're watching the news coming out of Washington, D.C., here in Wisconsin, being elated about the vote last night in which a new Supreme Court justice appears to have been elected by a 204 vote margin in Wisconsin over a sitting incumbent. It hasn't been done. Endorsed by Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann last Friday, 3 days before the election, and Tea Party members who now have to rush off to Washington, D.C. because they're holding that somewhat hostage. Can you tell me a little bit about the imminent shutdown or potential shutdown of the U.S. government?
Well, they're still trying. The president said every day he's going to bring them together and try to get a deal. I went back and looked at the implications for Indian country. And the last time there was a shutdown in 95 lasted 21 days, and 13,000 BIA employees were furloughed. It's very interesting. Many of them will be eligible for, if it goes on for some time, for unemployment. So it could actually start hitting state budgets because the unemployment insurance comes from states. General assistance checks will be delayed. Royalty checks will be delayed. Anyone who has contracts with the government is likely not to get paid in the same way they've been being paid. And I haven't been able to get a straight answer on this, but even tribes with 638 contracts, if they have pending money, that could be held up.
Well, that was interesting because I had this kind of thought, like if the Bureau of Indian Affairs shut down, would anyone notice nothing getting done?
Oh, absolutely.
They will.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
GA alone is a big one.
General assistance and stuff like that. But and how would that impact tribal governments? They just simply perhaps running out of money to be able to keep their own employees on at the local level?
Yeah, if tribes have good cash flow and they can kind of keep their money from their own sources, that'll be fine. But if they need to dip into another reserve, that's a problem.
Lots of employees in the 21-day shutdown stayed at the job, hoping to get paid when it was done and over with, reimbursed. You see that as a potential?
No, you're not allowed to do that. They divide the categories into essential and non-essential. I always wonder about what it's like to get a note saying you're non-essential. But if you're non-essential, you're not allowed in the building. You're not allowed to use any government equipment, phones, that sort of thing. In fact, I saw one note that several 100,000 BlackBerries will go silent.
Well, that's interesting. It's interesting to see where the impact of government will take place and where it won't.
Yeah.
21 days then, there's been a couple other shorter, actually by days and so forth. And my understanding is they've been funding the government by these incremental 1 to 3 week type continuing resolutions. And that basically the Democrats and the president have said that's going to be it. We can't run the government by a continuing resolution every week.
Right. Can you imagine trying to budget an agency? And let's take Haskell Indian Nations University. You're trying to plan for your needs for students, what books they need, what library resources, what athletic events, all of that, and trying to do it in 1 and 2 week increments. Next week, for example, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium is supposed to meet. If you're at a tribal college or at a BIA college, SIPI or Haskell, can you afford to go? If the government shut down as a government employee, you cannot go. You can't get on a plane. But what about contractors? Will they get reimbursed if they go? Will they be able to make the meeting happen? It has all sorts of implications. The problem with what's going on is there are really two issues. One is the short-term problem of the budget, and the other is the long-term budget. And unfortunately, I think the Republicans keep mushing them together, so you don't know which is which. And they're very two separate problems with two distinctive sets of solutions. But they just kind of fudge it all together as one, and it makes it a lot harder to iron it out.
My observations in the beginning. My understanding is there are a lot of moderate Republicans who want to get on with the budget and get it passed and get it over with. I said the Tea Party is holding the country hostage.
That's exactly right.
And where does it go? Does there, take a look on a mini scale what happened here in Wisconsin. Is there something in the Wisconsin vote where 6 weeks ago Kloppenberg polled 25%, Prosser 55% in a four-way primary race for the state Supreme Court. 6 weeks later, she's won the race marginally. There's no great big mandate on this, and yet at the same time, to upset a sitting incumbent Supreme Court is not exactly an easy task.
No, I think that's a big deal, and I think every moderate Republican ought to be looking at that and saying, am I willing to throw this all away for something that's not going to last? I mean, I heard Michael Medved, who's a very conservative talk show host, say, look, to the Republicans, give this one up. You're not going to get anything better. This is the best deal you're going to get. Why do you want to shut down the government and risk losing elections over it? And as much as I disagree with him on most issues, he's right on that it's not going to improve their situation in the ballot box, and it's not going to improve the funding situation. In fact, it's going to cost more. It's going to cost lots of money. If I were the president, the one thing I wish he would do more of is out getting private businesses to talk about their impact of the federal budget and how that might cause them to do layoffs. I mean, there are, for example, imagine how many federal employees are traveling on any given day of the year. And if that all stops, what does that do to airlines? What does it do to hotels? What does it do to state tax receipts? It has implications far beyond just the federal government.
I won't get a bigger refund back next year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be.
I got some property out here, too.
I'm reading two things. One, it's going to be more expensive to shut down and start back up. They're going to lose savings. And the question is whether they're going to lose the political credibility of the country as well.
I think on both counts.
We're coming back to you next week. If things start shutting down, we're going to talk to you again and see what you see coming down the pike and how we can survive without the U.S. government on our backs.
Very good.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you for joining with us today and come back again soon and often. Miigwech. And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Wednesday, March 6th. I'm your host for today's program.
April 6th.
Shut up. And welcome. All right.